Senator Collins.
Thank you. Mr. Brennan, I want to follow up on an issue that several of my colleagues have raised on the issue of capturing a terrorist versus targeted killing of a terrorist. In a recent speech that you gave at the Wilson Center, you said, quote, "Our unqualified preference is to only undertake lethal force when we believe that capturing the individual is not feasible." Yet, a study by the New American Foundation, as well as numerous press reports, indicate that in the first 2 years of President Obama's administration, there were 4 times the number of targeted killings than in 8 years of President Bush's administration. Is your testimony today that the huge increase in the number of lethal strikes has no connection to the change in the Obama administration's detention policy? Because obviously, if we're capturing a terrorist, we have the opportunity to interrogate that individual and perhaps learn of ongoing plots. But if the strike is done, that opportunity is lost. Are you saying today that it is totally unconnected to the Obama administration's shift in its detainee policy?
I can say unequivocally, Senator, that there's never been an occasion that I'm aware of where we had the opportunity to capture a terrorist and we didn't, and we decided to take a lethal strike. So that certainly there is no correlation there as far as any type of termination of the CIA's detention interrogation program and that increase in strikes. Now, I will say that if you look out over the last 4 years, what happened in a number of places, such as Yemen and other areas, where there was, in fact, a growth of al-Qaeda, quite unfortunately. And so what we were trying to do in this administration is to take every measure possible to protect the lives of American citizens, whether it be abroad or in the United States, as well as a maturation of capabilities and insight into those intelligence plots as a result of the investment that was made in the previous administration that allowed us in this administration to take appropriate actions.
Well, let's talk further about the targeted killings. When the targeted killings began several years ago, the first order effect of these operations was the elimination of the senior operational leadership of al-Qaeda, of many of the leaders, many of the core leaders. Obviously, that is a critical priority. We have heard both former CIA Director Michael Hayden in an interview on CNN and General McChrystal say that it is now changed and that the impact of those strikes is creating a backlash. For example, General McChrystal said the resentment created by American use of unmanned strikes is much greater than the average American appreciates. They are hated on a visceral level, even by people who have never seen one or seen the effects of one. He added that the targeted killings by remotely piloted aircraft add to the perception of American arrogance that says, well, we can fly where we want, we can shoot where we want because we can. And General Hayden also has expressed concerns that now that the strikes are being used at lower levels, arguably, that they are creating a backlash that is undermining the credibilities of governments and creating new terrorists when a neighbor or family member is killed in the course of the operations. Do you agree with General McChrystal and Director Hayden about the potential backlash from the strikes, from the targeted killings at this point? I'm not talking about the initial strikes.
I think that is something that we have to be very mindful of in terms of what the reaction is to any type of U.S. counterterrorism activities that involve the dropping of ordnance anywhere in the world, absolutely. Whether it's a remotely piloted aircraft or whether it's a manned aircraft, I think we have to take that into account. But I would not agree with some of the statements that you had quoted there, because what we in fact have found in many areas is that the people are being held hostage to al-Qaeda in these areas and have welcomed the work that the U.S. government has done with their governments to rid them of the al-Qaeda cancer that exists.
Finally, today, this committee received the OLC memos describing the legal justification that many of us, particularly those who have been on the committee far longer than I, have been seeking for some time. And I, too, spent a large part of this morning reading them. Yet the Obama administration, within months of taking office, released several OLC memos describing the legal justification for the treatment of terrorist detainees that were held in U.S. custody. Do you think it was appropriate that a different standard was applied to the release of the memos from the Bush administration than those produced by the Obama administration?
Well, respectfully, Senator, I don't think there was a different standard. Not being a lawyer, I've become...
One was released within 4 months of the Obama administration taking office. The other had been requested for a very long, much longer time. Released only today.
I'm not a lawyer. I've come to learn the term, understand the term sui generis, which means that, you know, there's obviously unique circumstances surrounding it. The OLC memos that released shortly after the president came into office, they were released because the program was terminated. It was no longer in existence. OLC, Office of Legal Counsel opinions that deal with ongoing activities, ongoing programs, it's a different animal. And therefore, I think those decisions were looked at in a much sort of different way because of those sui generis circumstances.
Well, I would say to you that both are absolutely essential to the ability of Congress to carry out its oversight responsibilities. Finally, the Intelligence Reform Act and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, with which you're very familiar and of which I was a co-author, requires the Director of National Intelligence to recommend who the CIA director should be to the President of the United States. I'm aware of General Clapper's, the DNI's letter endorsing your nomination, but that's different from his actually recommending to the President that you be chosen. To your knowledge, did General Clapper recommend to the President that you be nominated for this position?
I know for certain that he made a recommendation to the President, but I would defer to General Clapper to tell you what that recommendation is.
Thank you.
Smart.